Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here in person or tuned in on the phone. So we're here for our Miller Zell speaker series, and I am super excited to have everyone here and kick it off for 2023. I don't know about you all, but retail has been a pretty big roller coaster this year, and I'm very, very excited to have a retail expert, Carol Spieckerman, here to tell us what twists and turns are coming ahead as she reads out her trajectories for 2023. A little bit of housekeeping, make sure your phones are on silent. And anybody who's online or in the room, do think of questions along the way, but Carol has packed so much into what she's going to do that we'd love for you to hold it till the end. If you are online tuned in, I know there are a lot of you, please do put your questions in the chat now and as you have them, and I will go back and track. So I'll be tracking along the way. All right? So without further ado, because there's so much to listen to, Carol, take it away.
Thank you, Tina. It's great to be here. Well, starting off, I think we can all agree that retail is in a state of complete reinvention, and navigating through has never been more challenging. But still, some of the retailers, brands, and solution providers that have made it through these tests of fire have emerged on the other side stronger than ever. But on the other side, it's a whole new world where labor shortages, supply chain snags, and inflation, they're weighing down results for some of the big guys especially. Some have closed hundreds of stores, but others are planning on opening hundreds or even thousands more. And after years of doubling down on digital, retailers are swinging attention back to brick and mortar again. So it's really a great time to be here at Miller Zell. Miller Zell is a company that's been optimizing branded environments in retail for almost 60 years. I mean, you guys have seen some things. And through it all, you've been a trusted resource to retailers, brands, and others as they navigate to what's next. And that's what this is all about, navigating retail from now to next. But one fundamental truth unites where retail's going next. Retailers are no longer just places that sell stuff. They're now platforms that tie together digital, social, mobile, bricks, clicks, acquisitions, partnerships, and so much more. It's a ton of capability and opportunity that didn't exist in retail even a few years ago. But what it means is, going forward, your biggest opportunities will be unlocked through platform building, platform partnership, and platform monetization. So this fundamental truth underpins all the trajectories I'll share with you today. Now, my trajectories are themes that I'm constantly creating, connecting, and mapping across all kinds of categories, borders, business models, and touch points. They're where all the insights that I'm tracking roll up. But they're also my alternative to trends. Because in retail, as fast as things are moving, once something becomes a trend, it's too late. And trend watching can also sometimes have you following what everybody else is following, even if it's not relevant for your business. So at any given time, I'm curating, and tracking 40 or 50 trajectories for my clients and keynotes. But I've whittled it down to 13 for our conversation today. And yes, that's 3 more than the title promised. I wanted to make sure that we covered all the ground that we needed to cover across 3 key themes, which are bricks, business models, and brands. And with that in mind, I bumped it up to a baker's dozen of 13 to make sure that we covered all of that ground. But through each of these themes, we're going to talk about what's really happening and why, and then we'll get to what's next, and with those trajectories guiding the conversation all along the way. So let's get started on the journey. I want to start with some good news, first of all, that the rumors of the death of brick and mortar have been greatly exaggerated. In fact, stores are where so much of the action will be in 2023 and beyond. So much so that I'm calling 2023 the year of the store. And store openings are definitely part of that. You've got retailers that were tapping on the brakes not that long ago, opening stores like Sam's, planning to open 30. May not sound like a lot, but it was basically coming off a complete standstill. Dollar General is taking it to a whole nother level by planning on opening 1,050 stores in fiscal 2023. And there's a lot of activity and growth happening on the QSR front, with McDonald's alone planning on opening 1,900 locations. And of course, there's all those digital native brands that we've been talking about that are hanging shingles these days. But collectively, that's going to represent hundreds more stores. And that'll come from the likes of Warby Parker, Fabletics, Athleta, and others. But wait, there's more. As retailers flex their multi-format mojo, even more stores will dot the landscape. Even retailers like Walmart and Dollar General and Aldi that pioneered and perfected specific formats that have been very influential in the industry, they're now multi-format operators. But through these new formats, retailers can reach out to new demographics. They can showcase particular categories that maybe are even more profitable. They can put a spotlight on solutions and services, or just offer a much more compelling convenience proposition. Now, Dollar General's Pop Shelf concept accomplishes more than one of those goals. It's actually targeted to higher income shoppers. It basically picks up where Dollar General left off. It's sort of a treasure hunt environment that encourages more frequent traffic. And it focuses on those discretionary categories and general merchandise that retailers are determined to sell more of. And we'll be talking more about that in just a minute. But Dollar General plans on doubling the number of Pop Shelf locations this year to reach as many as potentially 3,000 locations. So store openings and this format expansion are definitely part of the story, but there's more to the year of the store. For one thing, retailers are testing and learning like crazy, and stores have emerged once again as their favorite laboratories. It's just that the experiments they're running are a lot more sophisticated than they used to be. You've got Walmart right now working on an augmented reality capability where shoppers can point a phone at a shelf and the products will organize on their phones based on personal preferences. And you have grocers like Wegmans and Kroger's and Albertsons and others all planning on, as we speak, literally rolling out AI-powered digital carts. So also too, there's been a lot of conversation about the metaverse. In fact, Tina with Miller Zell, who you just heard from, she actually did a great interview last year as part of Miller Zell's speaker series with Elizabeth Strickler about the metaverse. Really great information. I encourage you to check that out. But you know, there's still some curmudgeons out there who say the metaverse isn't going to amount to much. But all of that's set to change as more physical experiences that will ground the metaverse and enhance adoption are on the way, like the Outernet district in London, which, if you haven't seen it, really is just an explosion of metaverse capabilities and just expressed in physical form. So if you're ever over the pond, I suggest you check it out. It's really pretty amazing. But either way, it's clear that where things are going next is that bricks are going to have some new tricks in the year of the store. And the store really is becoming, once again, the core of retailers' business. And let's talk about some reasons why. First of all, retailers have realized that stores can be critical for driving the brand awareness and brand affinity that actually drives their digital businesses. So they're realizing that true scale is no longer achieved in a single channel, including digital. Even Amazon's come around to that way of thinking. Also, too, it turns out that younger generations of shoppers like shopping in stores, thank you very much. And just when we thought that Amazon had redefined convenience as being a purely digital experience, we now know that plenty of shoppers find stores to be convenient depending on any number of variables. So this is why we have so many of these digital native brands opening stores, and they see so many opportunities there. But it's interesting that so many of these brands initially proudly proclaimed that just operating in that single digital channel would be their competition killer. Look at them now. They're all clicks to bricks converts, because in many cases, the data that they've collected in the digital space has emboldened them to open stores because those stores are optimized, localized, and definitely socialized from day one. So when you think about all of these dynamics and all of these folks focusing on brick and mortar, what's next is we're in the early stages of the digital rethinking of brick and mortar. And here's what's going to drive it. First of all, you're going to have the big guys like Amazon and Walmart combined with some forward-looking beauty and fashion brands primarily. They're going to be out there on the bleeding edge, testing and learning while everyone else looks on and decides whether to be a fast or maybe even a slow follower. Also, too, you're going to have these third-party technology companies rushing in, this is already happening, to help retailers build big bridges to new capabilities, including in brick and mortar. And then you've got those big tech platforms that are set to unleash all kinds of immersive devices, platforms from Meta to Apple and others. And these devices, in many cases, will facilitate more immersive and engaging experiences in brick and mortar. And those of you who work with retailers, I think you can back me up on this next one, which is that there's an alien invasion underway in retail, where all kinds of non-traditional players are entering the retail force and coming to a retailer HQ near you. Whether they're tech whizzes, they come from digital agencies, they're content mavens. Bottom line, the days of merchant princes ruling the retail universe are coming to a close. But if all of this sounds overwhelming, know that it's not going to happen overnight. In fact, I always tell my clients that the transitions between now and next always tend to go on longer than anyone would have predicted. And this is even true in retail as fast as things are moving in this space. So the goal really is to find treasure in those transitions rather than just lurching at shiny objects. But know that as some folks do some of that lurching, plenty of consumers will long for more traditional experiences. So things will operate on a spectrum from high touch to high tech for quite some time. And there's already some backlash on the high tech side, particularly when it comes to automation. Turns out that some shoppers don't like automated checkouts, for example. They think they might be paying the same or even more for less service, and they don't like the idea of machines possibly taking jobs away from their kids or even themselves. So retailers are definitely going to have to tread lightly here. And some retailers are already factoring that in, like Tesco. Tesco was going pedal to the metal with their automated Get-Go format. And then they thought it over, and now the next generation of Get-Go stores that are rolling out now are actually hybrids that reintroduce people-powered checkouts. So it was kind of a case of, whoa, not so fast. And I've been saying that for the last couple of years, retail has been all about just exploring the possibilities, determining what can even happen, what is even out there, and what can we do? Well, the conversation and the focus has quickly shifted to being about setting clear priorities. And sometimes that will mean actually holding back on technology. It'll very much be a case of just because you can doesn't mean you should. But either way, the clearest route to success is very clearly to offer choices. Retailers have learned, sometimes the hard way, that that choices are basically synonymous with convenience. And that's why you have so many of these options out there now, from curbside pickup to home delivery and so on. I get asked all the time by the media, hey, what are the one or two options that retailers are going to get behind? It feels like it's all over the place. Well, the answer for the foreseeable future is that we're living in an all-of-the-above world. Because again, retailers have learned that choice is critical to keeping shoppers playing on their platforms. And they know that if they don't do that, then these shoppers will jump off their platforms and go to somebody else's who will meet them where they are. So another massive disruption has quietly snuck up on retail. Business model diversification has quickly become the growth engine of retail's future. In fact, retail's new rule really is diversify or die. So remember when we talked about those platform partnerships and platform monetization and platform building? Well, diversification is what will drive a lot of that. But one fundamental burning question will drive the diversification. That is buy, build, or bridge. Retailers deciding when it makes more sense to build solutions internally, when to lean into those platform partnerships, or when to just go all out with an acquisition. Well, the most successful retailers will be doing all three at once. And initially, it was interesting because retailers were mostly going the build route. They kind of thought they could build everything themselves, and they soon realized that wasn't going to cut it. So some went on these massive acquisition sprees that in some cases continue to this day to build up their technology platforms and their e-commerce capabilities primarily. But what's next is I'm tracking a very big uptick in bridge building as retailers start to revisit the benefits and the agility that leaning into those platform partnerships brings. So this is really great news for everybody, really. It's great news for solution providers and brands because retailers have never been more open to outside partnerships. But it's great news for retailers because they've never had more folks from outside and solution providers and others that are ready and able to help them build those bridges, and again, particularly in brick and mortar these days. But also what's next is, soon we're going to start to see more of a migration between these buy, build, and bridge models. And that could be where retailers acquire a company after initially testing the water through a partnership or even taking a partial stake in a company and then making an acquisition. Retailers taking solutions in-house after learning the ropes from a partner, kind of like, thanks for the tutorial, we'll take it from here. And in some cases, just burning those bridges down altogether and scrapping business models and just being willing to fail fast. So there never has been more opportunity for these partnerships, but also know that it may not be a long-term relationship as retailers reserve the right to change their mind and migrate to these different models. But either way, it's clear that retailers that attempt to just stay in that build mode will be left behind. Now, retailers from Walmart to Target to dollar stores and even drug retailers are jumping into the grocery business, a notoriously low margin business that's very difficult to manage. Now, why would they do that? Well, because grocery drives the more frequent trips that can drive sales in those higher margin categories like apparel and home. Now, Dollar General has been so focused on the grocery business that they've added almost 65,000 coolers to their stores. And if you talk to Dollar General, it's all about coolers, coolers, coolers. And Amazon CEO Andy Jassy just recently said that they're going to go big on brick and mortar grocery because of the undeniable traffic driving benefits that it brings to their business. But here's the rub. Thanks to all those convenience options, shoppers have become heat-seeking missiles. They're going online, they're checking produce off of a list, but they're not necessarily browsing the pajamas or the pillows. So the bottom line here is that cross-category conversion is still the holy grail, but it's become a tougher nut to crack. And you have to know that inflation isn't the only dynamic that's dinging discretionary spending. Either way, one thing's clear, mix matters. And here I'm talking about category mix. And this grocery business and this grocery push definitely factors in. Walmart's been talking about how unfavorable mix shifts have been to blame for some of its margin dips. Target's been citing upticks in what it calls frequency categories. Well, call it what you will, just having these upticks and these disproportionate grocery sales have led to margin misses and markdowns for some of these guys. But at the end of the day, retailers are dreaming of selling more discretionary categories, and they're taking some really interesting approaches to doing that. For example, here's a really nice home department in a grocery store. Yes, H-E-B, the fast-growing grocer out of Texas, is opening home departments in their stores, and these departments are stocked with private brands. So that's a double dip of margin that's meant to offset that low margin grocery business. Also too, you'll start to see more of remodels and remodel activity and new builds reflecting this focus on discretionary categories and showcasing them. Like Walmart's Springdale, Arkansas store, which got a lot of publicity, a lot of buzz when it opened. It really is just a big old laboratory teeming with experiments. But now they're starting to parlay those learnings into their new remodels for this year. And these stores will feature bigger aisles, more room to browse, upscale mannequins, better lighting, all of it meant to showcase categories like pet and beauty and home and apparel. And I found it interesting too that this concept in Springdale was called time well spent. Well, that also speaks to how increasing dwell time is critical to driving discretionary sales. So know that this will start to impact remodels for sure, but also even brand development going forward, this laser focus on pushing those discretionary categories. But the number one business model that will power retailers' platform diversification is the shift to solutions and services. Now, solutions and services are quickly becoming retailers' favorite profit centers. And they're also obviously a powerful hedge against some of these product-based headwinds that we've been talking about. And they also present a massive data gathering opportunity. And this is why so many retailers, even ones that you wouldn't think it was core to their business, are pushing into healthcare. It's one of the reasons. Because healthcare really is a data gathering goldmine. So going back to that buy, build, or bridge, that's why a lot of retailers are still building up their healthcare premise through acquisitions. You've got CVS just making a $10 billion acquisition of Oak Street Health, which will just catapult them into primary care. Amazon just closed a deal for One Medical for $3.9 billion that's also a primary care play. But now the FTC is taking a really close look at that one, so we'll see if it sticks. But either way, you can certainly see the intention. And I think we all know that Walmart's healthcare ambitions have been off the charts. They've been buying, building, and bridging their way into primary and preventative care, into telehealth, and so much more, really disrupting not just the retail industry, but the healthcare industry, and obviously inspiring plenty of others to follow in their footsteps. So the shift to solutions and services, it really is just getting started. And you know, you have to know that retailers aren't going to stop by just plugging these solutions into their platforms. Going forward, secret services will be a thing. That is, retailers and some of these third-party companies creating these solutions and services and then monetizing them as white label products, if you will, even to their competitors. And there's so many examples of this, and they just continue to explode. You have Target buying Shipt, the last mile solution, and making it available to other retailers. You have Amazon's Just Walk Out technology. And Walmart just hit a really big milestone of over 1 million deliveries for its Go Local last mile solution. And wouldn't you know, retailers are Walmart's primary customers here. So at the end of the day, retailers are becoming newfound frenemies as they attempt to monetize all of these new capabilities on their platforms as white label services, and again, yes, even with their competitors. So secret services are already becoming the dominant model with sustainability, for example, where you have a slew of these third-party providers from ThredUp to Trove, and on the grocery side, Good to Go, Flash Food, and others that are sweeping in to help retailers achieve their next level sustainability goals. And it's a good thing because retailers are determined to be a part of sustainability's second act. And as part of this, they'll have to make longer term, more concrete commitments. And they're going to have to keep those commitments if they want to onboard and maintain relationships with new generations of shoppers that are critical to their future and that are absolutely paying attention. So you're going to see more of these companies coming in to help retailers do this, and you're also going to see more retailers participate in these programs with these third parties, and you may not even know they're the ones providing it. So part of the problem here has been that these fast fashion companies like H&M and Zara have shined the spotlight on this situation. And now you have these faster, cheaper disruptors like Shein out of China. And the perception is that these companies are creating piles of throwaway clothing and damaging the planet in the process. They're all working on changing that. But on the other side, you've got companies like Patagonia making outrageous promises to the planet and keeping them and kind of shaming everybody else in the process. So going forward, it really is clear that retailers will have to deliver on these promises. They'll have to make more aggressive promises. And re-commerce has obviously become table stakes in the fashion world. And retailers and brands that also will have to stay on top of the new things that shoppers are paying attention to. The sustainability world really has become a moving target. Because if before shoppers were concerned with general things like waste and plastic, now firsthand encounters with soaring temperatures and disruptions to water and energy sources, they're raising the bar. And even though all of this presents a challenge, sustainability really should be, at the end of the day, viewed as an opportunity. If for no other reason, then again, it's critical to onboarding those new generations of shoppers. And once you get it right, you'll have those as loyal shoppers, and that will be critical to the longevity of brands and retailers. So my next trajectory gets the award for most promising and profitable diversification dive. Retailers have gone absolutely mad for ads. And retailers are doing this because they've realized the potential to monetize that juicy first-party data that they're gathering from POS systems, from loyalty programs, and so on. And again, just another platform monetization play. Now, no two are taking the same approach, but they're united in their mission to turn brands into paying customers. And it really is no wonder, because the estimates are currently that this market, this retail media opportunity, will be a $45 billion opportunity this year. And some folks that you talk to in that business will say it's even more than that. And going back to some of those margin misses, the margins in this business are 70 to 80% in some cases. This ad mania, though, it also exemplifies that buy, build, and bridge migration that we talked about, where retailers like Lowe's that at one point were leaning in on third-party relationships with Criteo and Yahoo and CitrusAd, they're now pulling all of that in as a build project under their One Roof Media Network. So we're going to see more of that, and the new standard is for retailers to own all of this and bring it in-house. So what's next? A lot. The ad world really is on fire in retail, and as this digital rethinking of retail marches on, more activity within stores will be quantifiable, and that will add more value to it and more value to retailers' ad platforms. Retailers also will have the opportunity to get dollars coming and going because they can charge for some of those loyalty program benefits, charge consumers for them, like same-day delivery, and then turn around and offer the data that they collect from that to their brand partners. Right now, agencies are directly in competition with retailers. And if you follow the ad world, you know that plenty of them are freaked out about that. But soon, retailers will be in fierce competition with one another for all of those ad dollars. And the next wave is, and this is already happening to some degree, retailers won't hesitate to use their bully pulpit to, let's just say, encourage brands to use their in-house networks before they go outside. And going forward, too, you're going to be hearing more about non-endemic ad sales. In other words, companies that don't even sell to retailers that nonetheless want to have access to all those shoppers and all that advertising exposure and doing business with retailers to make it happen. So suppliers will have to decide who they're going to give their ad money to and what they're getting in return. And brands and solution providers that work with agencies, which describes most of them, will have to reevaluate their targeting strategies and make sure that they're retooling them for some of this business shifting over, if not a lot of it shifting over, to the retailer side. But at the end of the day, it is just another platform monetization play. And wow, look at all of the non-product plays that retailers can make in order to plump up their profitability. It really has just grown exponentially in such a short period of time. So does anyone remember when it was out of the question to open a store if you had a wholesale business? I'm getting some nods in the room. Does anyone remember when, if you were a supplier, you absolutely couldn't think about selling to more than one retailer in a channel? Well, I remember those days, and they're well behind us. And borrowing from that really weird hit movie that just won all the awards, the brand world really has become an everything, everywhere, all at once situation. And that's because retailers aren't the only ones that can diversify. Brands are now diversifying into wholesale, direct-to-consumer, marketplace partnerships, social commerce. They're floating around on the resale market, as we talked about. So one of my evergreen trajectories for years is heating up once again. Brand ubiquity really is the new exclusivity, because now brands have permission to roam. The new thinking is that it's better to have a brand in many places in order to keep it top of mind and to build that valuable affinity and brand equity. Also, too, it's understood that there's so many shiny objects competing for consumers' attention that keeping a brand locked away really is a perilous plan these days. And that's a very radical shift in thinking, just to think that you can have your brands everywhere all at once, and it used to be all about narrowing your options and deciding where you were going to play and where you weren't going to play. But beauty brand Glossier is a great example of this. There's one of their really nice minimalist flagship stores, but they're also selling to TJ Maxx and Sephora. So we're used to digital brands opening stores. That's becoming part of the new normal, and it's no longer considered an anomaly. But thanks to this brand ubiquity movement, they're not stopping there. There is a wholesale heyday underway where kind of what's old is new again, as more brands and retailers lean into that advantage that using somebody's existing physical and digital footprints can bring. But here's what's different. Unlike those lopsided relationships of the past, where retailers held all the clout, now brands bring a lot to the table, and particularly those digitally native brands. And retailers, on the other hand, bring a lot more scale than they ever have before. But the big shift in thinking is that wholesale and direct-to-consumer are no longer mutually exclusive. In fact, they're synergistic. And that's why brands like Draper James, which you may know as Reese Witherspoon's brand, they're psyched about selling to Kohl's because it's not considered a compromise. It actually will help drive their direct-to-consumer business as that brand is out there more and gains more awareness. So really, it is a situation of everything, everywhere, all at once, but it's all good. Now, in the brand world also, you may have noticed there's a private brand palooza heating up, where private brands have been around for years and they ebb and flow throughout the years. But we're in a surge period right now, and part of it does go back to that brand ubiquity, because when national brands are everywhere, private brands emerge once again as a powerful way to differentiate. Not to mention the fact that private brands bring a lot of value as consumers are concerned about inflation, and those old habits die hard with budgeting. And of course, they bring on the margin for retailers too. So some retailers, they've all been revisiting their private brands, launching new ones, refining, in order to drive those differentiation points. But some, like Target, have kind of torn it down and built it back up. Target had a lot of really great brands that brought in tremendous value for them, but they did away with some of them and took a big risk and created completely new ones in their place. And thankfully, those brands gained traction very quickly, and all indications are they've been pretty successful, including in the grocery space, which is where they've really been focusing. And Walmart is revisiting its fashion proposition once again. They want to make sure that those higher income shoppers that they know are already shopping in their stores and online, that they don't head for the exits when apparel's on the list. So they're creating brands like Scoop and Free Assembly that are better brands, once again, overseen by actual designers, just to make sure that they can hold on to those customers and give them something else to look at other than grocery. But going back to that buy, build, and bridge proposition, DSW is taking a really interesting buy approach to private brands. They're making acquisitions, basically turning national brands into private brands instantly through acquisition, like their recent acquisition of Keds. So what's not to like about private brands, right? Value, margin, all of that good stuff. Well, too much of a good thing can be a not good thing, because if the market gets flooded with all of these brands, it can have a dilutive effect, and it can even, confuse shoppers. And here's an area, one of many, where you might say that Amazon ruined it for everybody, because they've been creating hundreds of private brands across all kinds of categories. And you don't even necessarily know they're affiliated with Amazon. I know I don't unless the name Amazon is on the brand. And on top of that, you have all those brand factories that operate on the Amazon platform, flooding even more of these kind of no-name brands into that marketplace. So in the wake of this private brand palooza, I'm forecasting some private brand pare downs and consolidation. We're already seeing it from the likes of Kroger and some others, to where it's going to be a story of expansion and contraction. Also, too, you're going to see retailers focusing a lot of their private brand development on those discretionary categories to get that double dip of margin, just like H-E-B. But the buzziest brand story that is part of this brand ubiquity and that is really heating up all around the globe is live stream shopping and the shift to live stream shopping and social commerce. Now, China has absolutely taken the lead here with $497 billion in live stream sales in 2022 versus a comparatively measly $20 billion in the US. But that's set to triple by 2026, with Gen Z representing over 50% of those sales. So you have to know, though, that as the algorithms get better and as the personalization recommendations and all of that get sharper, these numbers will just continue to grow exponentially. So what's next? Well, the real power will be unleashed as retailers, brands, and creators share content, and particularly as they share digital assets. And so this more collaborative model is starting to take hold. And along with that, retailers will be buying, building, and bridging their way into maximizing these opportunities. And just like with the ad business, a slew of third-party providers will come in to help retailers optimize what I call the 3 M's: mix, media, and message. That is, making sure that they're effectively working a mix of content, leveraging the mediums that consumers care about at any given time, and then optimizing messages for those platforms. And increasingly, that optimization will mean creating messages that drive instant purchases. It was interesting, just this past week, a Walmart executive said that they want to shorten the distance between content and purchase. And that's really what it's going to be all about. So believe it or not, we've navigated through 12 of my lucky 13 trajectories. And I want to close with one that busts one of the most pervasive myths in retail today. And that is that retailers are scrambling to keep up with consumers, that their hair is on fire and they're just, don't know what's next. When the reality is that shaping is the new responding. Because armed with all of these capabilities that we've talked about, and data in particular, retailers have never been more firmly seated in the driver's seat. So they will actually be driving a lot of the new behaviors and the new activities that we'll see in the year of the store and beyond, and of course along with some of those other big platforms. And they're not reactionary bystanders. And the good news is, neither are you wherever you play in retail, and whether you're building bricks, business models, brands, or all three. So I hope that you're really excited about the trajectories that I shared. I know that I am, and I think it's going to be a really great year with some very new developments, but I think they present more opportunities than ever before for lots of different diverse retail stakeholders. So thank you for your attention, and my contact information's on the slide if anyone wants to continue the conversation offline. And in the meantime, I'll take questions from our live audience, and Tina from Miller Zell will field anything that we hear from the live stream.
It's quite a field. So there's been some great questions being asked. I asked them to hold till the end. So I don't want to ask, does anybody in the room have a question before I delve in? Okay.
You can still ask later, right?
Yes, you can. This isn't a, yeah. All right. Are the direct-to-consumer retailers who are now opening stores using their new stores as part of their distribution networks, i.e. local fast shipping warehouses? Just perspective on that?
Well, like a lot of things in retail, it depends. I do think that is the plan for some of these brands. In general, there's been a shift to these direct-to-consumer the physical expressions of their brands becoming more practical. You know, before we would hear a lot about these stores that were just kind of brand billboards, and they were like, oh, we don't care if they're profitable, we just need to keep our name out there. So I do think this practical element is coming into play to where they want to leverage these spaces to drive sales, to be profitable, and yes, increasingly to follow suit with the rest of traditional retail to evolve some of those locations into fulfillment capabilities.
Okay, great. Next one. Do you have an example of a healthcare company who has monetized the data and not just the traffic? Does anything come to mind?
You mean the question is whether the healthcare companies themselves have?
Right. Anybody who has taken that healthcare data and monetized it, I think everyone wants to get their hands on it, but I don't, there's so many governances around that. So I think the person is just wondering, do we have an example of anybody who started to monetize healthcare data?
Well, I think so much of that is kind of happening on the stealth to where you don't necessarily know. But in general, retailers are the ones making the big diversification play. You know, healthcare has kind of been its own ecosystem, and I think most of the healthcare players out there have stayed within that ecosystem within reason. And it's the retailers that have stepped out and said, oh, this is adjacent, to our pharmacy business, or it's adjacent to our health and wellness push, or the products that we're selling in that regard. So, I think most of the diversification and the utilization of that data outside of traditional healthcare will be sort of turbocharged by retailers, and mainly through these acquisitions.
Right, that makes sense. I just recently got my, hey, do you want to join Amazon Health?
Oh, right.
Yeah,
Amazon is, I would say Walmart and Amazon are probably the most ambitious in this space, and Amazon is absolutely determined to win with healthcare.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the data they already have on my shopping habits.
Oh, yeah.
We'll move on.
Well, and they're going to combine all that together, and you're going to be really surprised, I'm sure, by what's served up to you when you go to Amazon going forward.
When I have a question, I automatically still just yell Alexa into the air. All right, next question. Do you think the sustainability, social responsibility pledges matter more to consumers than getting their items, food, clothing, packages, as quickly or cheaply as possible? So what is that? Push-pull.
Well, it's a good question, and it can vary generationally. I know that in focus groups that I've been in, and just anecdotally conversations that I've had, that younger generations of shoppers really pay attention. They do their research, and it's interesting too that it kind of can become a trade-off situation. To your point, like measuring out these things and calibrating them and going, well, I did a very bad thing. I did business with this, fast fashion company. It was such a cute blazer or whatever. And then they go, well, I'm going to make up for that by, going and doing this other thing. So they're doing the calculus. It's not just like one behavior all the time. But I do think that there are balancing acts that happen. And, one of the probably the guilty pleasures is to go for things like quick delivery that are, obviously not sustainable. And, again, the calculus could be to offset that with something else, or to do business with a more sustainable company, or unfortunately for retailers and brands to just hold off on purchases and say, okay, I don't need any more. Hearing a lot of that.
Yeah, that's great. I myself, given my age in retail, have noticed it went from just having the recycle logo and that was enough, to being hyper transparent. And then we just got back from Euroshop, where they're going to start tracing the elements that made up your product, where it got manufactured, where it's put together, all the way through to the end of life. So it's going to be even more transparent and interesting. But the heart of the question, which I love and you answered, was how much are consumers willing to give up to have that be pristine? So it'll be interesting to watch that.
Well, I think going forward, it really might be we want it all, and you need to make it happen.
Yep.
So
I think that's probably where it'll land. Okay. We saw companies like Webvan 20 years ago fail. Then the pandemic brought local delivery from brick and mortar stores back in a big way. Will these services survive? Why now and not then? Do you have perspective? These are great questions. So
yeah, really great question. Well, going back to, I'll kind of hopefully not overcomplicate it, but Diversification really is the key word here, because the more diversified a retailer's or brand's business is, the more they can offset losses with things like that. So it isn't the old days where everything has to be profit, profit, profit. This diversification of these platforms, with Amazon being the Uber example of it, that allows them to do all kinds of other things as loss leaders. And so, unfortunately, some of these companies that are more narrowly focused will be forced to figure out how to make it profitable because they don't have that same diversification, while these highly diversified platforms and retailers will say, oh, you know, we want to win on last mile delivery or whatever, so we'll just buy the business. And that's kind of what adds the complexity to it. So I do think that some of the pure play models absolutely have struggled. And that's even true when we talked about the sustainability and circular economy enablers. You know, a lot of those companies have struggled mightily to become profitable because they do have that narrow focus, but retailers want those solutions so much that they're willing to sort of ride it out with them. Yeah. So I do think we're entering into a new phase to where, with all of the data, with the capabilities we've talked about, these companies have a better chance of becoming profitable over time, but it's still very difficult as a singular, narrow model.
Right. And my little tiny piggyback to that would be, I do remember the days of the initial web vans, and it was, I don't think consumer adoption and trust was there yet. And I also think companies didn't have that kind of distribution operationalized yet. So it was more inefficient, it took a lot longer, it was grossly expensive, and people weren't used to it. So now you're used to getting your Ring notification that someone's delivering something to your house and you know it. Some of them come into and stock your refrigerator or leave it, have your garage code and leave it in your garage. So I think it was also part, to answer that part about why not then, I don't think that the consumer comfortability, making up a word today, was in place yet, nor do I think the operationalization of it from the company to the van or the van to the houses was set yet. But even with Uber coming in, and now everybody's used to everything being mapped, and it's okay for everybody to know where you live and when you're going to be home, I think those types of things have made it okay for home delivery to get more prolific.
Yep, good points. Good points.
Okay. Oh, and here we go with more questions. Do you have comfortable shoes? I know you do. Okay. How important is the surrounding environment for brands whose strategy is to be everywhere all at once?
What was the first part of the question?
How important is the surrounding environment for brands whose strategy is to be everywhere all at once? So if they're not immersed in a store with the brand, how do they operate as a brand outside of the store?
If I understand the question correctly, or this is the way I guess I'll attack the question, is to say, again, it is kind of all about diversification these days. But more and more, what I'm seeing too is it's becoming a phase strategy. When you say everything everywhere all at once, it does kind of give the impression that it's all happening at once for a single brand. Now I'm seeing more brands have phase strategies where they say, okay, we're going to start, you know, and very deliberate phase strategies where they'll start with direct to consumer, and they're like, okay, you know, 2 or 3 years down the road, we're actually going to go into wholesale. So it's becoming, I think, less of an accidental business to do this diversification, and I think that it's becoming more of a phased approach and a more strategic approach to how they can pull all of those different levers and diversify their distribution, but not necessarily do it all at once.
Right.
But I do think, you know, increasingly, again, when you think about Amazon, you could say they were late to the party because they operated as a purely digital business for years while traditional retailers were expanding aggressively into the digital space. And now you've got Amazon acknowledging that stores are going to be very much a part of their future, and that they're, you know, reconsidering that digital-only strategy. So, you know, it may take time, but I think diversification is the model of the future, really.
Okay. Any questions from the room? Okay. Hold, please. I'll get first.
Thank you, Carol.
You bet.
My question is in relation to two of your trajectories, the private brands and also the retail media. So I read this week that Kroger spent $4 million recently in sports ads for their private label peanut butter. So I wonder, is there a threat that they could really anger their partners like P&G, who wants to promote their peanut butter through the retail ad networks? And is there a chance of the brands pushing back on retail ad media networks because they don't want to support the retailer who's also promoting their private brands?
Yeah. Your question has the whole world in it. It really does, because one of the criticisms that retailers have experienced is that they're not promoting their private brands as using all of the tools that they have and digital and all of that. They're not just, the old school way was just to rely on shelf comparisons. And it was like, hey, I hope everybody can see the value, But now it's, there's again been criticism that they're not pulling all the levers in the digital space to really optimize their private brand opportunity. But yes, there is sometimes some backlash with the national brands, and they don't want retailers to be so aggressive with their private brand promotions. But you have to know too that a lot of these national brands are in the private brand business. So that keeps the factories running, and that's part of their business too. So they don't want to shoot themselves in the foot, when it comes to it. But you make a really great point, and it is going to be interesting to see how it unfolds on the retail media side, to see how aggressive retailers get with their private brands in that space, or if they're, since the monetization opportunity is so great on the national brand side, if they're going to sort of back off for a while and see how that, the money flows, and then from that point on decide as a next stage strategy if they want to start bringing more private brands into the mix there. But you have to believe they're not going to just leave private brands out of the equation.
Yeah, so
Great
many
question.
lines seem to be blurring between everything. Business models, companies, distributors, it's crazy. Great question. Chip?
So we heard a lot about data and about how that's what's fueling a lot of this thing. Are privacy concerns a thing of the past? I assume that there's a trend going that way where they're not, but is there going to become a problem where it's going to be an issue again?
Privacy concerns are very much front and center, and of course the standards are different, which is also kind of a moving target. You have a much more aggressive standards in Europe, and you have California with their own standards that everyone is kind of deciding whether they're going to borrow from that or go the other direction. And now you have the big controversy around TikTok, which I think is shining a spotlight on it and creating sort of an everyday awareness of that, to where it just won't go away because it's just in the headlines all the time. So data privacy, yes, is a huge concern, and it's one that everyone is going to have to tread lightly on. It's not going to be where you can kind of have all these, heinous practices and hope that it doesn't get noticed. The transparency is there. Consumers will find out. So again, it's going to be interesting to see whether there is some sort of a middle ground between what's going on in Europe and here. With everything being a global dynamic, I think it's very difficult to have these very extreme, this big spectrum, if you will, of data policies and data management and sort of the promises that you're making to consumers, again, with so many of these businesses being global businesses. So somewhere they're going to have to, I think everyone's going to have to in some ways meet in the middle, but just turning a blind eye to it won't be an option. It's very much front and center, and it's just going to keep staying in the headlines and creating awareness on the consumer side.
And also, I want to go back to something we were talking about earlier about the healthcare too, and you brought up how companies are coming on, Amazon and some of the other health companies that are coming that aren't coming through the healthcare system aren't really bound by the same types of things that the hospitals are, because it's a free exchange of information and they're asking consumers. So I'm watching some of those companies slice off big chunks of what would normally have gone to a hospital because you can get that same care, without all of the paperwork and all of the same kinds of things. So it's been interesting to watch how that data has been exchanged freely by the consumer to get rid of all the things that they're
Yeah,
bound
it's
by.
a great point, because more and more retailers and, you know, telehealth and all of that, and when you migrate into these new models, the data practices of those models kind of kick in, and it's completely different than it was before. You know, may the force be with them, you know, as they navigate through all of this. But obviously they've thought it all out, or they wouldn't be going so aggressively into the healthcare space.
It's
But I
an
think
evolution.
telehealth is going to really be the game changer there.
Agree, and now that delivery, you know, we also know a lot of people get their scripts from overseas or somewhere else because, you know, to avoid some of that, so it'll be interesting. One of the other things I wanted to talk about, data and regulation, that we were talked about before, and then I think we have one more question online. When we were talking about sustainability, when we were in Dusseldorf at Euroshop, it was constant, this full circle and the logo of full circle, and we were talking to a lot of the companies that had a stake in that game, and they said, well, what's happening is the government is regulating, mandating that you can trace materials, trace production, and trace, so it's going to be built in as part of the cost over there. So it'll be interesting what happens on our shores given what's happening over there as far as traceability.
Yeah, and by the way, I know you and Tom were at Euroshop, and I encourage everybody to check out LinkedIn and some of Miller Zell's posts, because you guys were doing some really great daily dispatches, I think, and a lot of them were focused around sustainability. So it's really good information. But I think it was showcasing how the standards there are just so much higher than we're used to here.
Yes, I think Tom's in front of one of those like machines that's during one of his posts.
Yep.
Okay, last question that I have in the, nope, I got one more. It came in. Curious if you see retailers continuing to express in their stores their commitment to their local neighborhood. Are consumers responding to those efforts as genuine?
Yeah, localization isn't going away, and it's kind of like private brands. It's something that's been around for years and years, and then it kind of surges and then ebbs and flows. But we're in a big movement right now where retailers are very focused on localization, and again, it's something that can't be just phoned in. You know, you can't just change a couple of design elements on a store. The problem is that so many retailers' businesses, or traditional retailers' businesses, are very much predicated on keeping things as much the same as possible. So you have to decide how much latitude you're going to give to localization, how much you'll allow these assortments to be unique, you know, within individual stores, and courting local brands. But currently, there's a big movement toward localization again. And I do think that with this more sophisticated data and these data capabilities, I think that's driving a little bit more confidence on the part of retailers that they can execute localization more effectively and definitely more profitably.
And the last question is actually a follow-on to that, and you might have answered it, but it's to add on to Sue's question, which was the person who asked the question before, on top of commitment to the community, localization, and creating a sense of belonging that's all trending now, how can localization extend beyond just retail, healthcare, banking, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, you know, I think Whole Foods actually set a really good standard early on, where, and more retailers are doing this type of work, where prior to opening a store, they get to know the communities, they go to community meetings, they meet with community leaders, and are really trying to create true stores of the community versus just looking like, oh, another stamped out store, you know, came to town. You know, again, it takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of investment, but I think that grassroots community outreach is very much an opportunity, and, you know, again, that just kind of goes beyond the window dressing. But, you know, hopefully more retailers, you know, retailers that don't do that, you know, it becomes a boon to small businesses, which is not a bad thing either. And they can really play that localization card. And, you know, I'm talking, you know, I spoke to a group of small retailers a few weeks ago, and they were really excited about the opportunities because, you know, again, it kind of goes from ditch to ditch. Everyone's like, oh, the big shiny big box store came to town. And then it swings way back, and people are like really supporting local businesses and you know, finding the stores to be more navigable, and there's a lot of press around that and movements for supporting local businesses. So, you know, I think at the end of the day, it's good for everyone, but I think that some of these bigger retailers are going to get sharper with their localization promises. And it does go back to that multi-format movement, because a lot of the ways that they're going to achieve that is through dedicated formats. So instead of saying, how do we localize this giant box, it's what's the new format that we want to create that will be tucked into a neighborhood and have a more curated assortment or specific solutions and services. So that's also driving that multi-format movement.
That's great. We address that. We've addressed localization with a lot of our clients, you know, from QSR to retail to even collegiate, which is much easier because it's geography.
It is local.
Right,
yeah.
right. But it's then, you know, with that, it's interesting. It's how do you pull from the country so that they still feel like they're part of that one location. So it's something that we wrestle with, iterate on, and evolve with our clients as well. Any other questions? Yes. Gentleman in the front.
Yeah, you spoke a little bit about the metaverse, which is obviously one of like the trendiest things going on right now. Another thing that's sort of out there that really I think people are trying to figure out is AI. What are you hearing about just in terms of how AI retailers are dealing with it or helping it to shape the retail landscape?
Just about every retailer out there is doing deep work in AI, whether they're acknowledging it or not or putting it out in a press release. AI is just a game changer for retailers. But going back to that buy, build, or bridge, the big decision, the burning question is, should we attempt to build these capabilities in-house and hire some of those aliens that we talked about and just own those capabilities, or should we just outsource it and hook up with partners to make that happen? And there's lots of folks out there that are in that space and doing a really good job with it, lots of really exciting startups that are very interested in growing their business through retail. So I think that buy, build, or bridge equation is going to be what's really interesting here. But yeah, AI all day long, and every retailer out there is doing something about it, you know, aggressively.
Yep.
So.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, we've answered all the questions on the phone, all the questions in the room, right?
Yay.
How about a round of applause for fielding all those
Thank you.
questions?
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, Tina.
Yes, this is the second time we've had Carol in our speaker series because of the inspirational, interesting, and always on point advice that she gives and the guidance that she provides to Miller Zell. So we're super appreciative to have you again and to kick off this year's series. Thank you all for attending today. Thank you for the great questions. And those of you who tuned in from wherever you are, thank you for that as well.
Yeah.
I also wanted to remind everybody that this is a speaker series, and our next series is coming up on May the 4th, which is a special day for some of you. And we'll be hosting Stephanie Stuckey, and she'll be talking about how she bought the brand back from her family and how she's building it through social media and a lot of sweat equity.
That'll be great.
Yeah, it'll be fun. So thank you all for joining, and let's go into our happy hour. Those on the phone.
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.